Clara Whitmore pressed her last coin into a stranger's hand and walked away before she could change her mind. That coin was supposed to buy her supper. Instead, it bought her silence because if she spent it on herself, she would have to admit she had run out of options. She had run a pride 3 days ago, out of hope the day before that. And tonight, in a town that had already decided who she was, before she opened her mouth, she was about to make the worst trade of her life. If this story already has your heart, hit that subscribe button and follow Clara's journey all the way to the end and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far this story travels. Clara Whitmore was not the kind of woman who begged. She had watched her mother beg, once watched her stand in the doorway of a man who owed her wages and press her hands together, like she was praying to someone who had already decided not to answer. Mother had come home that night, with half of what she was owed and twice the humiliation. Clara had been 11 years old. She had memorized the shape of that moment the way other children memorized prayers. She had told herself she would never do it, but that was before 3 days without a real meal. Before her boots split open along the left sole and every step across the dry Montana trail ground dust and gravel directly into her skin. Before she counted her remaining coins in the shadow of a pine tree and found exactly one. Before she arrived in Black Pine, Montana, in the summer of 1883, and understood within the first 10 minutes that this town had already made up its mind about her. She had not even spoken yet when it started. She stepped off the trail and onto the main road, just as the afternoon heat settled over everything, like a wool blanket pressed flat against the sky. The street was wide and sun-beaten, and crowded with the particular kind of noise that small towns produce: wagon wheels, the argument happening somewhere behind the feed store, a woman calling a name from a second-floor window. Clara walked straight. She kept her chin level. She had learned years ago that the moment you let your posture slip, people read it as confession. A man on the porch of the general store looked up from his newspaper. He did not say anything. He just watched. Then he turned to the man sitting beside him and said something low, and they both laughed. Clara kept walking. The boarding house was at the far end of the road. She had heard about it from a woman at the last water stop, a Mrs. Aldrich, who ran the place, who reportedly took in travelers, who was supposed to be fair-minded. Clara had carried that information like it was currency. Nay, she had repeated it to herself during the worst of the second day, when the sun was brutal and the trail stretched out ahead of her like something that had no intention of ending. She pushed open the door. A woman stood behind the front desk, with the specific expression of someone who had already formed an opinion before the door finished opening. She was somewhere in her 50s, heavyset, with a ring of keys hanging at her hip, and a face that had decided several things about Clara in under 3 seconds. "We're full," the woman said. Clara stopped. "I haven't asked for a room yet." "We're still full. I'm looking for work," Clara said. "Not charity. I can cook, I can clean, I can manage lawn mending, kitchen supplies. I worked 3 years in a household in Billings." The woman's eyes moved across Clara, slow, deliberate, the kind of look that was meant to be felt. "What brought you out here alone?" "Work," Clara said. "Where's your husband?" "I don't have one." "Family?" "No." The woman picked up a cloth from the counter and began wiping something that did not appear to need wiping. "Don't take on women traveling alone. Nothing personal." "It's a policy." Clara looked at her for a long moment. "Is that a policy, or is that a decision you're making about me right now?" The woman's expression hardened. "Good day, miss." Clara turned and walked back out into the heat. She stood on the porch for a moment with her hand pressed flat against the post, not because she needed it for balance, but because she needed something solid to press against, while she decided what her Her stomach had moved past hunger into something quieter and more dangerous. Kind of empty that stops making noise. She tried the restaurant next. The man who ran it, young, that round-faced, nervous, in the way that people who rely on other people's opinions tend to be listened to, her offer, looked past her shoulder to see who was watching, and then told her he was sorry, but he didn't need help right now. She tried the seamstress. The seamstress looked at her hands, then at her face, then said the same thing in different words. 18A. She tried the livery stable because she was running out of options, and because stable work was hard, and dirty, and sometimes hard, dirty work. Was the kind that nobody else wanted badly enough to turn down. The man who ran it was older, with the permanently squinted eyes of someone who spent most of his life outdoors. He actually seemed to consider it for a moment. Then a man passing on the street called out, "Chester, you know who that woman is?" The older man looked up. Something shifted in his face. "Can't help you," he said, and turned away. Clara stood in the middle of the road. She did not know what story was traveling ahead of her. She did not know what version of herself this town had already received, or from where, or through whose mouth. She only knew that it was moving faster than she was, and that it was not the truth. She spent her last coin on a heel of bread from a boy selling out of a basket near the water trough. She handed it over without making eye contact and moved quickly away like proximity to her was a risk he didn't want to take. Nay, she ate it standing up because there was nowhere to sit that was not someone's property, and she had learned not to sit on other people's property without permission in towns that were already suspicious of her. By the time the sun dropped behind the western ridge and the temperature fell from brutal to merely uncomfortable, Clara had been turned away from 7 different places. She was not panicking. She would not allow panic. Panic was a luxury that required enough safety to afford, and she was not in a position to afford anything. She found a narrow passage between the back of the general store and the fence line of the property behind it. It was not shelter exactly, but it was shadow, and shadow in a Montana summer night was something. She sat down against the wall, with her back straight and her bag pulled into her lap, and she began calculating. She had no money, she had no food, she had no lodging, and no immediate prospect of any. She was in a town that had, for reasons she did not yet fully understand, already decided to treat her as a problem to be avoided. She was 27 years old, and she'd survived worse than this, though at the moment she was having difficulty remembering exactly when or how. The voices reached her before the men did. 2 of them. Maybe 3. Coming from around the back of the building, talking at a volume that suggested they either did not care who heard them or had decided that who heard them did not matter. Found her trail coming in from the south. Figured she'd end up somewhere like this. Always do. Clara did not move. She pressed her back flat against the wall and kept her breathing even. The first man came around the corner and stopped when he saw her. He was broad-shouldered and in his 40s, with a kind of face that had stopped bothering to be careful about the expressions it showed. He said, "There she is." 2 more came around behind him. Younger. One of them was already grinning. "You're the woman been asking around town for work?" the first man said. Looked at him directly. "I don't know you." "No," he agreed. "I know you, or I know about you." He moved closer. Not fast. The slow kind of movement that is meant to demonstrate that hurrying is unnecessary, that the situation has already been decided. Word travels. Then word lied, Clara said. "Whatever you heard about me is not true." That's what they all say. He crouched down in front of her, putting himself at her eye level, in a way that was not friendly. "Here's what I think. I think you're in a difficult spot. I think you need somewhere to sleep tonight. And I think a smart woman in a difficult spot finds a way to make herself useful." Clara looked at him without expression. "Step back." "Now, see, that's not a very cooperative attitude." "I said step back." The grinning one laughed. "She's got some spirit." The first man reached out and closed his hand around her wrist. Then a voice came from the dark. "Take your hand off her." It was not loud. That was the thing about it. It was not loud, and it was not rushed, and it had the particular quality of a voice that had never needed volume to make itself understood. It came from the shadow at the far end of the passage, and it landed with the weight of something that had already finished deciding. All 3 men turned. Ethan Blackwood stood at the opening of the alley with his arms loose at his sides and his hat pulled down against the last light. He was tall, not in the exaggerated way that sometimes made men tall, but in the specific way of someone who had spent decades doing physical work and had simply grown into the shape that work required. There was a scar that ran from his left cheekbone down toward his jaw, pale against the sun-darkened skin, and he was looking at the three men with an expression that contained no anger at all, which was somehow more frightening than anger would have been. Earthman let go of Clara's wrist. He did not do it immediately. He did it after a moment, the way a man does when he is trying to make the release look like his own decision. Blackwood, this isn't yours business. I'm making it mine, Ethan said. She's nobody. She's a drifter. She's a woman who told you to step back, Ethan said. And you didn't. That makes it my business. The grinning one stopped grinning. The third man, who had not said anything yet, took a small step backward. You planning to make a fight of this? The first man said. I'm planning to stand here, Ethan said. Whether this becomes a fight is entirely your decision. There was a long silence, the kind of silence that is actually a calculation happening out loud. The first man straightened. He looked at Clara once more, and then at Ethan, and then he did the math of the situation and found it unfavorable. He jerked his head at the others, and all three of them moved out of the alley without another word, though the first man took long enough to make clear that the exit was his choice and not their retreat. Ethan watched them go. Then he looked at Clara. She was still sitting against the wall with her bag in her lap, and she looked back at him with the expression of a woman who had not yet decided what this was. Anna bled. I'm fine, she said, which was not entirely true, but was the only answer she was prepared to give a stranger. You been sitting here long? Long enough. He looked at her for a moment. He did not look at her the way the men in town had looked at her, not with assessment, not with judgment, not with the particular calculation of what she might be worth or what she might be vulnerable to. He looked at her the way a person looks at a situation they are deciding how to respond to. Eat today, he said. Clara was quiet for a moment. I had something earlier. That's not what I asked. She met his eyes, a heel of bread. This morning. He nodded once, like she had told him something he needed to know. He turned slightly and looked back toward the main road, then back at her. I've got a ranch 4 miles up the North Trail, he said. There's food. There's a room with a lock on the door. I've got work that needs doing and nobody to do it. Ged looked at him. I'm not, he said, before she could form the question that was forming on her face, offering you anything except what I just said. Food. Honest work for honest pay. That's it. Nothing else. You don't know me, Clara said. No, he agreed. You don't know anything about me. I know you didn't beg, he said. And I know you didn't run when those men came around the corner. I know you've been turned away from half this town today, and you're still sitting here with your back straight. He paused. That's enough. Clara was quiet for a long time. She looked down at the bag in her lap. She thought about her mother in that doorway, hands pressed together. She thought about every decision she had made in the last 3 months that had brought her to this alley in this town, in this particular difficulty. She thought about pride and what it had cost her, and then she thought about what the alternative was if she said no to this stranger with the scar and the quiet voice. If you're lying to me is about what this is, she said, I will walk off your property in the middle of the night, and I will not look back. That's your right, Ethan said, and I want wages. Real wages, not room and board as payment. Room and board in addition to wages. Something shifted in his expression. It was not quite a smile. It was the look of a man encountering something unexpected and finding, against his own prediction, that he did not mind it. Agreed, he said. Clara stood up. She picked up her bag and settled the strap across her shoulder and looked at him. I'm Clara Whitmore, she said. Ethan Blackwood, he said. He did not offer his hand, which she noted. Instead, he turned toward the road and waited, giving her the space to decide whether she was walking beside him or not. She walked beside him. The main road was quieter now, the shops shuttered against the evening, a few lanterns beginning to appear in windows. They passed the boarding house. Clara looked at it without slowing down. Through the front window she could see Mrs. Aldrich moving around in the light, straightening something on the counter. And Clara felt something harden in her chest that had nothing to do with anger, and everything to do with the decision to stop expecting certain people to be better than they had demonstrated themselves to be. A man coming out of the saloons stopped on the porch when he saw them. He stared. "Blackwood," he called out, "you gone soft bringing that woman out to your place?" Ethan did not stop walking. He did not turn his head. He said nothing at all, which appeared to be its own kind of answer, because the man on the porch fell silent. "Oh," Clara said quietly. "Does this town have something against you specifically, or just against anyone you associate with?" "He most likely is." "What did you do?" "Nothing," he said, which is usually enough. She considered that. "You've been living alone up there 2 years. By choice?" He glanced at her sideways, just briefly, more or less. They left the town behind them. The trail north was wide enough for 2 people to walk without crowding each other, and the evening air was cooling into something that no longer pressed down. Clara's feet hurt. The split sole of her left boot was folding inward with each step, and she was resolutely not thinking about it. "What kind of work?" she said. "Ranch work," Ethan said. "Kitchen. Supply management. I've got 6 horses and a cattle operation that's been mismanaged since my hand left in April. Records need straightening. The main house has gotten out of order." "What happened to your hand?" "He got a better offer." He thought so. A pause. I didn't argue. Clara looked up at the trail ahead of them, climbing gently into the dark hills. "And you decided to hire someone you found in an alley?" "I decided to hire someone who knows how to hold her ground," Ethan said. Alley was incidental. She almost said something to that. She stopped herself, and they walked the rest of the way in silence that was not exactly comfortable, but was not hostile either. It was the silence of 2 people who did not yet know each other well enough to fill the gaps, and were both apparently willing to let the gaps exist. Ranch came into view as they crested the final rise, a main house and 2 outbuildings and a barn, with the mountain behind it, and a creek somewhere audible in the dark below the west pasture. It was not elaborate. It was solid and functional, and spoke of someone who had built things to last rather than to impress. Ethan pushed open the main door and lit a lamp. The front room was large and plainly furnished, with a stone fireplace and a work table that had papers stacked at one end, in a way that suggested someone had started organizing them and then abandoned the effort. A rifle hung on the wall, a worn coat on a hook by the door. "Kitchen's through there," he said. "There's bread and salt pork, and I think some beans from this morning. Help yourself. Your room is the second door on the left. There's a bolt on the inside." He looked at her steadily. "You bolt it if you want. That's not an insult, it's just a fact." Clara looked around the room. She looked at the papers on the table, and the rifle on the wall, and the worn coat on the hook, all of which told her something about the man who lived here, though she had not yet sorted out exactly what. "Why are you doing this?" she said, not the aggressive version of the question. Real version. Ethan set the lamp on the table. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the flame rather than at her. "Those men in the alley," he said finally. "I know their type. Know what they see when they look at a woman alone who's got nowhere to go. And I know what they do when nobody stops them." He looked at her then, directly and without apology. "I stopped them tonight. The question after that was what happens next, and I didn't like the answer if the answer was nothing." I was quiet. "It's not charity," he said. "I meant what I said about wages and work. This place needs managing, and I'm not built for managing it." "What are you built for?" she said. He considered the question with the kind of seriousness that suggested he did not take questions lightly. "Horses," he said, "fences. Things that don't require a great deal of conversation." Almost smiled. "But almost." "I'll look at the books tomorrow," she said, "after I understand the operation." "All right," he said, "and I want to talk to you about the supply situation. If you've been without a house manager since April, there are almost certainly shortages I'll need to address." "All right," he said again. And I'll need to know the horse names. This time something definitely shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but something in that general direction. I'll introduce you tomorrow. Clara picked up her bag. She looked at him. Once more, this large, quiet man, with the scar and the steady eyes, who had walked into a dark alley for a woman he did not know and offered her honesty without dressing it up as anything else. Thank you, she said. I don't say that easily. I know, Ethan said, though he could not have known. It simply seemed to be true. She went to her room. Bolted the door. She sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a long time, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling around her, the horses in the barn, the creek below the west pasture, the wind moving across the mountain above. She was not safe yet. She understood that. A stranger's goodwill was not the same as safety, and tomorrow would bring its own complications. And there was still the matter of why Black Pine had turned against her before she could speak. Meant that whatever story was traveling ahead of her had not stopped moving and would catch up to her again eventually. She was inside. She had food she had not had to beg for. She had a room with a lock on the door, and she had been told, by a man who seemed incapable of saying things he did not mean, that the way she held her ground was worth something. She lay back on the bed with her boots still on and stared at the dark ceiling. In the morning, she told herself, everything would begin. The real assessment. The real work. The real understanding of what she had walked into and whether it was the kind that she would trust or the kind she would eventually have to walk away from. She had walked away from things before. She knew how. Nay. But she found, as she lay in the dark with the mountain wind moving outside and the strange quiet of the ranch settling around her, that some part of her, the part she had been suppressing for 3 months, part that was tired of walking, was allowing itself, very carefully, to hope that this time walking away would not be necessary. She closed her eyes. Outside, Ethan Blackwood sat on the front porch with a cup of cold coffee and looked at the mountain and tried to remember the last time he had eaten supper with another person in his house. And he could not remember. He finished the coffee. He went inside. He did not examine what he was feeling too closely, because he had learned that examining feelings too closely was the fastest way to convince yourself out of something that might, if left alone, turn out to be the right thing. Went to bed. The ranch was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than it had been the night before. And somewhere in the distance, on the road between Billings and Black Pine, a man named Thomas Caldwell sat in a well-appointed coach and read a letter that told him exactly where Clara Whitmore had gone. He folded the letter. He placed it in his breast pocket. He knocked on the roof of the coach twice, and the driver urged the horses faster, and the wheels threw dust into the Montana summer night. And Thomas Caldwell looked out the window at the dark hills with the expression of a man who had not yet finished with something he had started. Clara woke before the sun finished rising. She lay still for exactly 3 seconds, as long enough to remember where she was, long enough to confirm that the bolt on the door was still in place, long enough to decide that lying still any longer was a luxury she had not yet earned in this place. Then she sat up, smoothed her dress, and began. She found the kitchen the way she found most things, by looking until she understood it. The shelves were organized the way a man organizes things when he is the only person who needs to find them, which is to say they were functional but not logical. Flour in one place, salt in another, dried beans stacked behind a crate of tack oil that had no business being in a kitchen at all. Cast iron pan that had not been seasoned properly in what looked like several months. A pile of invoices on the corner of the work table, folded and refolded in the way that suggested someone had looked at them repeatedly without doing anything about them. Clara put the tack oil outside the kitchen door. She moved the invoices to the table in the front room. She built the fire and started coffee and had biscuits in the pan by the time she heard boots on the porch. Ethan came through the door and stopped. He looked at the kitchen, then at her, then at the biscuits. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I was awake," Clara said, "and the kitchen needed to be reorganized regardless. I started with what was reachable." He hung his hat on the hook and sat down at the table without arguing, which she noted as its own kind of information. Some men argued on principle. This one appeared to only argue when he had a reason. Nay. She poured coffee and set a plate in front of him, and then sat down across the table with the invoices she had pulled from the kitchen corner. These go back to February, she said. I know. Some of them are past due. I know that too. The Hargrove account is 90 days out. If they haven't collected yet, they will soon. Ethan looked at her over his coffee cup. You read all of those this morning? It's not complicated arithmetic, Clara said. It's just arithmetic that nobody's been doing. She set the invoices down and looked at him directly. Tell me about the operation. All of it, not what you think I need to know all of it. He looked at her for a moment with that expression she was already beginning to recognize, the one where he was deciding whether to answer the abbreviated version or the real one. He set his cup down. 16 horses, he said. 3 breeding mares, 2 stallions, the rest working stock. 50 head of cattle on the east pasture, another 30 up near the north ridge that I haven't been able to push down since my hand left. The east fence line has 3 sections that need reposting before autumn, or I'll lose cattle through it. I've got a contract with the Territorial Supply Depot in Bozeman for 12 horses by the end of September that I am currently not in a position to fulfill. Clara was quiet for a moment. Why not? Because breaking and training 12 horses for military contract requires at least one other person who knows what they're doing, Ethan said, and I've been doing it alone since April. Why haven't you hired someone? He was quiet. Ethan. People in this part of Montana don't generally come to work for me, he said. Gets around. What word? He looked at the table. 2 years ago there was a situation in town. A man named Caldwell had a dispute with several ranchers in this valley over timber rights. He had more money and more lawyers and more friends in territorial government than any of them did. Most of the ranchers settled. I didn't. Clara felt something sharpen in her attention. She kept her face still. What happened? I testified before the county commissioner, Ethan said. Told them what I'd seen. Caldwell's men cutting timber on land that wasn't his, bribing the surveyor, running cattle off a neighbor's property to pressure him into selling. He picked up his coffee cup. Oldwell didn't win that particular fight, but he doesn't forget. And the people in town? Some of them work for him. Some of them are afraid of him. Some of them just don't want the trouble that comes with being associated with someone he's decided to make an example of. Ethan shrugged, the smallest possible version of a shrug. So they don't send their boys out here to work. They don't do business with me if they can avoid it. They're not exactly hostile, they're just absent. Clara looked at him. She thought about the man on the saloon porch last night, calling out that question. She thought about the particular texture of how the town had looked at Ethan when they walked through, not with dislike exactly. With distance. And Caldwell, she said carefully. Is he still in this area? He's got a timber operation about 30 miles east, Ethan said. He expanded since the commissioner's hearing. Bought up 3 more parcels. Something moved across his face briefly. No, one of them belonged to a man named Patterson, who didn't want to sell. Patterson had an accident about 6 months after Caldwell started making offers. What kind of accident? The kind that convinces a man to sell. The kitchen was very quiet. I see, Clara said. She looked down at the invoices in front of her. She thought about what it meant that this man, this particular man with this particular history, had walked into an alley and pulled her out of it. She thought about whether that changed anything about her own situation or simply added a new layer to it. Then she set those thoughts aside, because there was work to do, and she had not survived 3 months on the road by allowing complications to stop her forward motion. Horses, she said. He looked at her. Now? You said you need 12 trained by September. I need to understand what you're working with. He was quiet for a moment with something in his expression that she could not yet read, something that was not quite surprise, but was in that neighborhood. All right, he said. The barn was large and orderly, in the way that a man's particular priorities become visible in how he maintains his space. The horses were well fed and well groomed, and each one had a name that Ethan produced without hesitation as they moved down the Rogranite. Sable, March, Ethan. Old Confederate, a young roan he called Trouble without apparent irony. Clara watched him with the horses. She watched the way his whole body changed, something in the shoulders, something in the hands, the economy of movement that comes from years of working with animals who respond to tension before they respond to anything else. He was not performing for her. He simply was a different version of himself in this space. And she filed that away, alongside the invoices and the name Thomas Caldwell, and the understanding that she was inside a situation that had more complexity to it than she had initially assessed. "How many of these are ready for the contract work?" she said. "Nix are ready now," Ethan said. 3 more could be ready in 4 weeks with consistent work. The other 3. He paused at a stall near the end of the row. Inside, a dark gray horse stood with its ears pinned back, watching them with an eye that had suspicion layered over suspicion. The other 3 are going to require more than I've been able to give them working alone." "What happened to this one?" Clara said, looking at the gray. "Previous owner used the wrong methods," Ethan said. "I bought him 8 months ago. He's not dangerous, he's just convinced everything is going to hurt him." Clara looked at the horse. The horse looked back at her with that flat, defended expression. "No, the feeling," she said. Ethan glanced at her. She did not look back, which she suspected he noted. They went back to the main house, and Clara spent the rest of the morning with the books. The operation was not in ruins. It was in the condition of a well-managed ranch being managed by one person doing the work of 3. Records were mostly complete, just delayed. The contracts were solid. The supply situation was genuinely concerning but not unrecoverable. She made a list, then she made a second list of what the first list was going to require. Midday she had an outline. By early afternoon she had a plan. When Ethan came in from the pasture, she laid it out for him across the front room table. He read through it without speaking. Then he read through it again. "You did this in a morning," he said. "It wasn't complicated," Clara said. "The situation is actually manageable. What it requires is consistent attention and someone willing to make decisions. A Hargrove debt, I'll write to them today. Partial payment immediately, remainder by the end of July with interest. It's not ideal, but it's better than a collection visit." "And the supply run? I can go into town day after tomorrow," Clara said. "I'll need a wagon and a list from you of everything the operation requires, not just what you've been making do without." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Town's going to be interesting," he said. "Given that you arrived there last night." "I know," Clara said. "Yeah, anyway." He looked at her. "I'll come with you." "You don't need to." "I know I don't need to," he said. "I said I will." She looked at him across the table for a moment, this man who argued when he had reasons and did not argue when he did not, who had walked into an alley without being asked and was now offering to walk into town with her without being asked, maintained his horses with the kind of attentiveness that indicated he understood that the things in your care reveal who you are. "Fine," she said. He nodded. He pulled up a chair and sat down across from her and picked up the top sheet of her plan. "Walk me through it," he said. So she did. He listened, actually listened. Not the kind of listening that is waiting for a pause to insert a better idea, but the kind that absorbs and considers and asks questions that are good questions. Kind that told her he was not humoring her, but was genuinely trying to understand. They sat there for 2 hours. The afternoon heat moved across the room. At some point, Clara realized she had forgotten to be cautious and had simply been working, which was the thing she did best, and the thing that made her feel most like herself. It was a disconcerting realization. She did not examine it. That evening, Ethan made supper beans and salt pork and cornbread that was better than she expected, and they sat at the kitchen table and Clara said, "The gray horse." "What's his name?" "I've been calling him Ghost," Ethan said. "That's not going to help him." Ethan looked at her. "Meaning what?" "Meaning a name like Ghost tells a horse what he is, instead of what he could be," Clara said. Her mother had a saying. She said you don't name a child for the scar. You name them for the person who's going to wear it. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. He looked at his plate. What would you name him?" he said. "I don't know yet," Clara said. "I'd have to spend more time with him. He doesn't trust people easily." "I noticed," Clara said. "That's not a permanent condition." Yeah. Something moved across Ethan's face. She was beginning to catalog these small movements, the ones that happened quickly and were gone before he appeared to notice them himself. Yeah. This one was something she could not yet name, but it landed somewhere different than the others. "No," he said, "I suppose it isn't." She cleared the plates. He sat at the table with his coffee and pulled out the contract paperwork from Bozeman, and they worked for another hour, in a silence that had, sometime in the course of the day, become comfortable. Not familiar, not yet, but comfortable. The kind of quiet that two people settle into when they have agreed, without discussing it, that the other person's presence is not a burden. Clara went to bed that night, with the bolt on the door and the plan organized in her head, and the name Thomas Caldwell filed in a part of it that she did not open all the way, because opening it all the way required her to think about things she was not ready to think about yet. She was ready the next morning. She found Ethan at the barn before sunrise, running Ghost through a slow ground exercise, nothing dramatic, just presence and patience, asking the horse to accept the weight of a hand near his face and rewarding each small accommodation. Clara stood at the fence and watched. "He let you touch him yesterday," she said. "About 10 seconds, Ethan said. "That's progress." "It's a start," he said, which was different. They both understood how. She spent the morning reorganizing the supply shed, and the afternoon writing letters to Hargrove, to the Bozeman Depot, a former contact in Billings who owed her a professional favor and might be able to send a temporary hand for the September contract work. She wrote the letters in a clear, direct hand and did not soften anything that did not need to be softened. It was while she was finishing the third letter that she heard the wagon. She heard it before she saw anything, the sound of wheels on the North Trail, which was not the road into town, which meant it was not a casual visitor. Ethan heard it too. She could tell by the way his voice stopped mid-sentence from somewhere outside the barn. A pause, then his boots on the porch. "You," Clara said from the doorway. "No," Ethan said. The wagon came around the tree line, and it was not a wagon, it was a proper coach, the expensive kind with a driver up top and curtained windows. And it rolled to a stop in the yard, with the particular ease of something accustomed to commanding space. The door opened. The man who stepped down was in his mid-40s, well-dressed in the way that announced money rather than taste, with the kind of face that was accustomed to being looked at deferentially. He was not large, but he carried himself as though the space around him already understood his importance. He looked at the ranch with the expression of a man checking on a property rather than visiting someone's home. Then he looked at Clara, and something happened in his face so fast she would have missed it if she had not been watching carefully, something that was not surprise because it was not uncontrolled enough for surprise. It was more like the expression of a man updating a calculation. "Miss Whitmore," he said. The world went very quiet. Clara did not move. She did not let anything change in her face or her posture or the position of her hands. "Mr. Caldwell," she said. Ethan turned his head and looked at her. She felt the weight of that look, but did not meet it yet. Thomas Caldwell smiled. It was a well-practiced smile, the kind that had convinced enough people of enough things to have become second nature. "I heard you'd passed through Black Pine. I wanted to make sure you were settling in." "That's a long way to come to check on someone's accommodations," Clara said. "I was in the area," Caldwell said. He looked at Ethan then, and his smile adjusted smaller, more cautious, the way a man smiles at someone he respects as an obstacle. "Blackwood." 2 years, Ethan said. His voice was exactly what it always was, give or take. "You're looking well." Caldwell turned back to Clara. "I understand you've been asking around town about work. I have to say I'm surprised to find you here. Of all the ranches in the territory," he let that sit for a moment. "How did that come about?" "Mr. Blackwood offered me a position," Clara said. "I accepted. Is that so? Caldwell was quiet, looking at her with an expression that was measuring and calculating and performing friendliness over both of those things simultaneously. Well, I hope you'll be comfortable. He reached into his coat pocket and produced a small card. If you find yourself in need of anything, Miss Whitmore. A reference, a recommendation. I'm always willing to help someone who finds themselves in difficult circumstances. He held the card out to her. Clara looked at it. She looked at his hand. She looked at his. She did not take the card. I have everything I need, she said. Something flickered in Caldwell's eyes. It was brief, it was controlled, but it was there. Of course, he said. He put the card back in his pocket with the ease of a man who never lets a reaction show for longer than it's useful. Well, I won't take any more of your afternoon. He looked at Ethan. Net Blackwood. Ethan said nothing. Caldwell climbed back into the coach. The driver turned the horses. The coach rolled out of the yard and back down the trail toward the tree line. They watched it go. When it was out of sight, Clara turned and walked into the house. She sat down at the table. She pressed her hands flat on the surface and looked at them. Ethan came in 30 seconds later. He sat down across from her. He did not say anything. He waited. He knows I'm here, Clara said finally. I gathered, Ethan said. That's not a coincidence. He didn't happen to be in the area. She looked up. He was told I was here, which means someone in Black Pine sent word to him last night or this morning. Which means he has people watching. Ethan looked at her steadily. What is it that he wants from you, Clara? She was quiet for a long moment. Nia. She looked at the table. She thought about how much to say, and then she thought about what it meant that he had introduced her to his horses by name, and had listened to her plan for 2 hours, and had offered to come with her into town without being asked. She thought about what it cost her to trust people, and what it had cost her not to. When I was working in Billings, she said, I was employed by a trading company. Bookkeeping, supply management, the same kind of work I was doing this morning with your accounts. She paused. The company had a contract with Caldwell's timber operation. I processed the invoices, and I started to notice discrepancies. Payments to surveyors for land that was already surveyed. Fees to county officials that didn't have corresponding services. Numbers that moved in directions they had no legitimate reason to move. Ethan did not move. I kept records, Clara said. I wrote down what I found. Dates, amounts, names, accounts. I made copies of documents that were relevant. She looked at him. And then someone told Caldwell I was looking, and I lost my position and my reputation and my references in approximately a single afternoon. He told every employer in Billings that I had been stealing from the company. He had invoices produced that showed shortages that didn't exist before I started keeping my own records. Kitchen was very quiet. You have the copies, Ethan said. It was not a question. Clara was quiet for exactly the right length of time. I did, she said. They would be enough to reopen the county commissioner's case. Enough to bring in federal attention. Enough to dismantle what he's spent 2 years rebuilding since your testimony. Ethan looked at her for a long time. Where are they? He said. Nay, not here. Not anywhere he'd look. She held his gaze. I'm telling you this because you deserve to know what you've walked into by bringing me here. This isn't just about me needing work, Ethan. If he knows I'm on your property, then he knows I'm connected to you, Ethan said. And he already didn't like me. He was quiet for a moment. And something in his expression settled, not harder, exactly, but more certain, the way a man's face looks when he has finished a calculation and found the answer simpler than he expected. All right, he said again. We know what we're dealing with. We know he's watching. We know he's going to push. He stood up and picked up his coffee cup and walked to the window. And she could see from the set of his shoulders that he was not afraid and was not performing the absence of fear. He simply was not afraid. So we do what we were going to do. Go to town tomorrow. We manage the accounts. We work the ranch. We prepare the contract horses. He looked back at her. And we don't give him anything to use. It's not that simple, mine. I know it's not that simple, he said. I didn't say it would be simple. I said that's what we do. Clara looked at him. She thought about the gray horse in the barn, convincing himself that everything was going to hurt him. She thought about what it meant to be shown, carefully and without drama, that not everything did. He has reach in this county, she said. The sheriff is not... No, Ethan said, and there are men he can send. I know that too, and I'm not going to have you lose this ranch because of my... Clara. His voice was quiet and direct and stopped her sentence cleanly. This ranch was already in his crosshairs before you got here. The only thing that's changed is that now I have a reason to do something about it, beyond my own stubbornness. He paused. Don't take that away from me. She stared at him. For the first time since she had arrived, she did not know what to say. In her experience, men who said things like that were either lying or wanted something. She looked at this man, really looked at him, the way she had been careful not to look at him since they met, the way she looked at things she was not sure yet were safe, and she could not find the lie or the want. There was only the quiet, difficult truth of a person who meant exactly what they said. All right, she said finally. The word felt different in her mouth than it did in his. He nodded. He finished his coffee. He put the cup on the counter and went back outside to the horses. Clara sat at the table alone in the kitchen for a long time. Then she picked up her pen and finished the letter to her contact in Billings. She did not mention Caldwell. She did not mention the documents. She simply asked for a reliable hand who could be trusted, offered fair wages, and signed her name. She folded the letter and pressed it with the edge of her thumb, and told herself that what she was feeling was simply the relief of having told the truth to someone, and having it received without the world falling apart. She told herself that was all it was. She almost believed it. Outside, one of the horses made a sound, a low, questioning sound, and she heard Ethan answer it. Not in words, exactly, but in the way you answer something that is asking whether you are still there. A sound that said, yes, I'm here, you're all right. Clara pressed the letter flat on the table. She thought about Thomas Caldwell sitting in his coach on the road back to his timber operation, updating his calculations, deciding what move came next. She thought about the documents she had described as being somewhere safe, and the particular definition that she had settled on when she made that choice, and what it would mean for Caldwell if he understood what she actually held. She thought about Ethan Blackwood saying, I have a reason to do something about it beyond my own stubbornness, and the specific quality of a man who did not say things he did not mean. Next move was Caldwell's. She knew that. He would not come directly. That was not how men like him operated. He would send something first. A message, a representative. A rumor. Something that arrived before he did, something designed to isolate or pressure or frighten, the way he had operated in Billings and in this valley before that. She had survived the first version of his pressure in Billings by running. She was not going to run this time. She did not know yet exactly what not running would look like, or what it would cost, or whether the man working with his horses in the barn outside had any idea what he had agreed to when he said all right across a kitchen table on the second morning she had ever spent in his house. But she knew this. She had the documents. She had survived 3 months and several hundred miles to get to a place where she might actually be able to use them. And she had, against every reasonable expectation, found herself in a house where the man who lived in it had told her that the way she held her ground was worth something. She was not going to waste that. She picked up her pen again and started a new letter. This one was not to Billings. This one was addressed to a federal land office in the territorial capital, and it was careful and precise and stated certain facts in certain language that would be recognized by anyone who knew what to look for. She did not send it. She was not ready to send it yet. But she wrote it. She folded it. She held it for a moment. And then she placed it inside the cover of the account ledger she had been working in, pressed between the edges like something that had been growing quietly in the dark, waiting for the right moment to matter. The trip into Black Pine the following morning started before full light. Clara was already on the wagon bench when Ethan came out of the barn, and he looked at her sitting there with the reins loose in her lap and the supply list folded in her coat pocket, and he did not say anything about the hour or ask whether she had slept. He climbed up beside her and took the reins, and they rolled down the north trail toward town, with the mountain still in shadow behind them, and the valley beginning to show its first color ahead. They had not discussed what had happened with Caldwell the evening before. Not because there was nothing to discuss, but because they had both apparently arrived at the same conclusion overnight that discussing it further would not change what it was, and what it was required action rather than conversation. Yeah, Clara had the supply list memorized before they reached the main road. "The mercantile first," she said, "then the feed store. And I want to speak to the man who runs the post, the one you said is reliable." "Yes," Ethan said, "he's reliable." "Good, I have 3 letters to send." Ethan looked at the road ahead. The federal letter? She had not told him the letter to the Territorial Land Office existed. She had only mentioned the others. She looked at him sideways. You looked at the ledger," she said. "I looked at the accounts in the ledger," he said. "I wasn't looking for anything else, but it was there." He paused. "I didn't read it." Clara was quiet for a moment. "It's not ready to send yet," she said. "It needs one more piece before it has enough weight to force a formal response." "What piece?" "A witness," she said. "Someone in this county who saw Caldwell's men on land they had no right to be on. Someone whose name carries enough credibility that a territorial official can't dismiss it." Ethan did not respond immediately. The wagon rolled on. Ear opened up around them, the sound of the trail, the early birds, the creak of the wheels on dry summer ground. "Testified 2 years ago," he said. "I know," Clara said. "And they dismissed it. 1 rancher against a timber baron with 3 lawyers. She looked at him. "I need more than one voice. There are other ranchers in this valley who saw what I saw," Ethan said. "Most of them settled. That doesn't mean they forgot." "They talk?" He was quiet for a long time, long enough that she began to think he was not going to answer. "Maybe," he said. "If they believed it would actually go somewhere this time. If they believed there was something solid behind it." "There is," Clara said. "That's what the documents are. That's what I've been carrying for 3 months. It's solid, Ethan. It's enough. I just need the testimony to make it impossible to set aside." He turned that over in silence. She let him. Black pine came into view at the end of the main road, and even from a distance Clara could see the particular way a small town looks when it is already watching for something. 2 men on the porch of the saloon who had no reason to be there at 7 in the morning. A woman who came to the window of the boarding house and then stepped back. Ethan noticed it too. She could tell by the way his hands adjusted on the reins, not tightening, just becoming more deliberate. "Word got back to them," Clara said. "Word always gets back to them," Ethan said. They pulled up in front of the mercantile. The owner, a man named Pryor. In an anxious-looking and permanently positioned, just slightly behind whoever had the most power in any given room, came to the door and looked at them with an expression that was trying to be neutral and was not quite succeeding. "Blackwood," he said. Then, with more uncertainty, "Ma'am." "Good morning," Clara said, and climbed down from the wagon before Ethan had finished setting the brake. She walked into the mercantile with the list in her hand and the particular posture of someone who had decided that how she was received was other people's problem. She heard Pryor follow her in, heard him say something low to Ethan, heard Ethan's reply, which was apparently brief enough that Pryor did not try to extend the conversation. Clara worked through the list efficiently. When Pryor was slow with an item, she asked for it directly. When he tried to tell her something was out of stock, she asked when it would be in and made a note. She did not apologize for taking up space. She did not lower her voice. She did not check whether people were watching. They were, of course. 2 women near the dry goods who stopped their conversation when Clara came near. A young man near the back who seemed to be manufacturing a reason to stay in the store. Pryor himself, who was watching her with the expression of someone trying to figure out whose side he was supposed to be on. She brought her total to the counter. Pryor looked at the pile of goods. Nah. He looked at his counter, he said, with the careful tone of a man relaying a message rather than forming his own opinion. Miss, I'm not sure I can, that is. There's been some question about extending credit to accounts associated with. I'm paying cash, Clara said, and set the coins on the counter. Linked. Clara waited. He counted the coins. He counted them again. Then he began packaging the order. Ethan, who had been standing at the end of the counter, without appearing to do anything in particular, caught her eye and looked away again almost immediately, but she had seen what was in that brief look. It was not quite amusement. It was closer to the specific satisfaction of watching someone do something well. Needy. She sent the letters with Harris at the post, who was indeed reliable, a compact weathered man who took the envelopes without looking at the addresses and said only that they would go out on the afternoon rider. Clara thanked him. He nodded. That was the entire transaction, and it was one of the best conversations she had in Black Pine. The feed store was harder. Man, who ran it, was younger than Pryor and less practiced at hiding his hostility. Nen. And he said, while they were loading the wagon, me. You know, there's talk about you, Miss Whitmore. About why you really left Billings. Clara turned and looked at him. Not raise her voice. She did not soften it either. I know exactly what the talk is, she said. I know who started it, and I know why, and I know that there is not a single word of it that is true. You can believe it if you choose to. Most people find it easier to believe a powerful man's lies than an unknown woman's truth. That's not a new problem. She picked up a bag of grain that was too heavy for most women to lift without assistance and put it in the wagon bed herself. But I'd think carefully about which side of this you want to be associated with when it's finished. The young man stared at her. Ethan, behind her, said nothing. But when they climbed back onto the wagon and drove out of Black Pine, she felt the steady weight of his beside her differently than she had on the way, in less like proximity and more like something deliberate. You didn't need me here, he said, after they had cleared the town. I told you I didn't, Clara said. I know, he said. Came anyway. She looked at him. He was watching the road. Thank you, she said. He nodded once and did not make anything more of it, which was exactly the right response, and she turned her attention back to the trail and tried to organize her thoughts about what came next. What came next arrived faster than she had prepared for. They were 3/4 of the way back to the ranch when they heard the horses. Not the casual sound of someone on the trail, the specific rhythm of riders moving with purpose. Clara heard it first and put her hand on Ethan's arm without thinking, and he was already pulling the wagon to the side of the trail before she spoke. 4 riders came around the bend. They were not wearing anything that identified them, but they were wearing the kind of nothing that was itself an identification too well mounted, too deliberately casual, too clearly not heading anywhere in particular. In front pulled up when he saw the wagon. Blackwood, he said, with the particular familiarity of someone who has been told a name rather than someone who knows a person. You're on my trail, Ethan said. Just passing through, the man said. He looked at Clara with the specific kind of look that was designed to be noticed. Heard you've got a new arrangement out at the ranch. That's not your business, Ethan said. Just being neighborly, the man smiled. It was the kind of smile that had been rehearsed. Mr. Aldwell wanted me to pass along his regards. He says he hopes everything works out for Miss Whitmore. He'd hate for her to find herself in the same situation she was in back in Billings. Clara looked at the man directly. Tell Mr. Caldwell that I appreciate his concern. And tell him that I said hello to the Federal Land Commissioner in my letter this morning. She had not sent that letter. It was still in the ledger. But the man's face did something involuntary when she said it, a small, fast tightening around the eyes, and that was enough. We'll be on our way, Ethan said, and clicked the horses forward. Riders parted to let the wagon through. They did not follow. Clara did not look back, but she heard them turn their horses on the trail behind them and ride back the way they had come. True, Ethan said quietly, once they were clear. Not yet, Clara said, but he doesn't know that. Ethan was quiet for a moment. You know that just made things move faster. Yes, she said. I needed it to. He looked at her then, a long sideways look that she met directly. There's something you haven't told me, he said. She looked at the road ahead. There are several things I haven't told you. The thing that matters most, he said. Clara was quiet for long enough that the ranch came into sight ahead of them. She waited until Ethan had stopped the wagon in the yard before she turned to face him. The documents I copied in Billings, she said. They don't just show irregularities in Caldwell's accounts. They show payments to a man named Judge Reeves in the Custer County Court. Payments in cash, recorded under that doesn't correspond to any actual supplies. She held his gaze. Judge Reeves is the man who dismissed your testimony 2 years ago. Ethan went very still. There's more, Clara said. There are records showing that 3 parcels of land in this valley, including Patterson's, including 2 others that sold under what people called bad luck, were being planned for acquisition by Caldwell's company before the owners knew they were in trouble. Accidents, before the pressure started. She watched his face. He wasn't responding to opportunity. He was creating it. The yard was quiet. A horse moved in the barn. The summer heat pressed down. How long have you known this? Ethan said. His voice was very even. In February, Clara said. I've been trying to figure out how to use it without getting killed over it for 6 months. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, why didn't you go to the territorial capital directly? With the documents, with the evidence, why come out here at all? Because I tried, Clara said. I sent a letter to the territorial office in March. It was received. There was no response. Someone in that office is either afraid of Caldwell or in his pocket, and I don't know which, and sending documents to the wrong person doesn't expose him, it just tells him where the documents are. So you needed someone who had already testified, Ethan said. Someone with standing in the county. Someone whose name attached to a new filing would make it harder to bury. Clara did not answer, which was its own answer. Ethan looked at her for a long time. He looked at her in a way that she could not quite categorize, not angry, not betrayed, not calculating. Something more complex than any of those, something that moved through several things in the space of a few seconds. You came here looking for me, he said. I came here because I had nowhere else to go, Clara said. Both of those things can be true at the same time. Another silence. I didn't plan for you to find me in that alley, she said. I didn't plan for any of this. I had a name your name from a man in Billings who said you were honest and you'd testified before and you were not afraid of Caldwell. Figure out how to approach you properly. I was going to have a plan. She looked at him steadily. I didn't plan on collapsing behind the general store. But you were going to come to me. Yes, she said. Eventually, Ethan got down from the wagon. He stood in the yard for a moment with his back to her, his hands loose at his sides, looking at the mountain. Clara waited. She had learned, in the past 3 days, this was how he processed. He needed a physical moment, a moment of stillness that was not passivity but preparation. I'm not angry, he said. Clara blinked. That was not the direction she had been bracing for. She said, maybe, he said, but I'm not. He walked back to the wagon and started unloading the supply bags. You came here with something to fight. You needed someone who wasn't afraid to fight it with you. And you spent 3 days working my books and reorganizing my kitchen and learning my horses' names before you told me any of it. He set a give ground and looked up at her. That's not manipulation, Clara. That's someone who doesn't want to drag another person into trouble until they're sure the person can handle it. She opened her mouth. I can handle it, he said. She closed her mouth. Now get down from the wagon, he said, and help me unload these supplies. We have work to do, and I need to think about who in this valley I can get to sit down with us for a conversation about what happened 2 years ago. Climbed down from the wagon. She picked up a supply bag. She said quietly. I'm going to need you to understand something, Ethan. Eld will not wait. I said to those writers about the commissioner that bought us time, but not much. Yeah, he's going to move before the end of the week. He is going to try to discredit me, discredit you, isolate this ranch, and find a reason to come back here with authority that looks legal even if it isn't. Ethan kept unloading. I and the sheriff is Caldwell's man, Ethan said, has been for 2 years. I know. Then you know that when Caldwell moves, there's nobody in this county who's going to help us. Nobody official, Ethan said. He straightened and looked at her. Ransom Patterson is still in the valley. His father took the accident, not him. He never signed the sale. Legally, that land is still in dispute. He paused. There are 3 other ranchers east of here who never testified because nobody asked them to. Because they thought they were the only one. Clara stared at him. You know all of this. I've been out here for 2 years, he said. I didn't stop paying attention just because I stopped talking. Something shifted in Clara's chest, an adjustment, a recalibration, the specific sensation of understanding that a person is not what you initially measured them to be. Not because you were wrong exactly. Because there was more. Need to move fast, she said. Tonight, Ethan said. I'll ride to Patterson first, then east to the Delaney brothers. Me. You stay here and make sure those documents are somewhere better than a ledger. Clara nodded. She was already calculating. I need to send the federal letter tonight, too. Not the territorial office, I need to go above it. Me. There's a federal land commissioner in Washington, whose circuit includes this territory. Nay. If the letter goes through Harris with the right routing, it won't touch the territorial office at all. Can you write it tonight? I already wrote it, she said. I wrote it 3 days ago. I've been waiting to know whether it was worth sending. Ethan looked at her for a moment. And now? Now I know it is, she said. Nodded. He picked up the last of the supply bags and carried them toward the barn. Anne. Claire watched his back for a moment, this man who was not what she had measured him to be, this man who had spent 2 years paying attention to a valley that had decided to ignore him. This man who had said, I have a reason to do something about it beyond my own stubbornness, and had meant it in a way that included, apparently, everything she had just told him. Then, she went into the house and took the federal letter from the ledger. She sat down and read it carefully. It was good. It was precise and documented and cited specific records in specific language. Nay, but there was something missing. She had written it before she had this conversation, before she knew what she now knew about Judge Reeves, and the section on judicial corruption was thin. She picked up her pen. She wrote for 2 hours. The afternoon heat moved across the room and the light shifted, and somewhere outside, she heard Ethan preparing his horse for the evening ride, heard him speaking quietly to the animal the way he did, low and unhurried. Clara wrote. She crossed out and rewrote, she added dates and amounts and names, and she was precise about every single one, because the only thing that mattered now was that every word in this letter was something she could prove. When she finished, she read it through twice. Then she folded it and sealed it, and wrote the routing address in a hand that was clear and deliberate. Ethan appeared in the doorway. I'm ready, he said. Acherson's place is an hour north. Delaney brothers are 2 hours east. I'll be back before midnight. Clara stood and handed him the letter. Give that to Harris. Tonight, not tomorrow. Tell him it needs the eastern routing. Ethan looked at the address. Something moved through his expression, recognition, maybe, of what she had managed to reach for in a single afternoon. This is going straight to Washington, he said. It has to, Clara said. The moment Caldwell finds out we're talking to the other ranchers, he'll move to suppress anything that goes through the territorial channel. Nan, if we can get this to the federal commissioner before he knows it exists. He won't be able to bury it, Ethan said. He'll try, Clara said. But there's a difference between trying to bury something that exists in one county and trying to bury something that's already in federal hands. Ethan looked at the letter for another moment. He folded it and put it in his coat pocket. He looked at her. You've been carrying all of this alone, he said. It was not a question, and it was not accusatory, and it was not pity. It was simply a statement of fact delivered in the tone of someone who understood what a fact like that cost. Clara did not know what to do with that. She looked at the table instead. "It locks tonight," Ethan said. "The rifle is on the left wall by the front room." "You know how to use one?" "Yes," she said. "Good." He paused at the doorway. "There's a loose board under the kitchen work table on the left side. A plank from the wall. It's where I keep things I don't want found." He looked at her steadily. "Put the documents there." Clara looked at him. "You never told anyone about that." "No," he said. "I didn't." He left. She heard his horse in the yard, and then the sound of hooves on the trail, and then nothing but the ranch settling around her in the summer dusk. She went to the kitchen. She found the board. She pressed it, and it lifted cleanly, and in the space beneath it, there was a small tin box. She did not open it. It was not hers, and room beside it. She went to her room. She took the documents from the folded cloth at the bottom of her bag, the copies she had carried across 3 months and 400 miles. Papers she had not let out of her physical possession since the night she left Billings, with nothing else worth taking. She held them for a moment. Then she carried them to the kitchen and placed them carefully in the space under the board. She pressed the plank back down and stood up. The house was quiet. Outside, the mountain held the last of the light. Somewhere in the west pasture, one of the horses was moving. And in the yard, at the edge of the tree line, a shadow that had been very still for the last hour began to move. And Clara did not see it. She was in the kitchen. But something in the air changed. Some quality of the summer dusk shifted by a degree that was too small for thought, but not too small for instinct, and she stopped. She stood very still in the kitchen. Then she walked to the front room and took the rifle down from the wall. She checked it the way a woman checks a rifle when she has checked many rifles efficiently, without drama, with the specific attention of someone who has learned that preparedness is not aggression. She went to the window. The yard was empty, but the shadow at the tree line was gone, and the branch that had been still was moving, and some things you cannot unsee once you have learned to look for them. Clara stood at the window with the rifle in her hands and thought about Thomas Caldwell, sitting in his coach on the road last night, updating his calculations. She thought about what he would do when he found out that Ethan had ridden north to Patterson's place and east to the Delaney brothers. 80. She thought about the documents under the kitchen floor, and the letter in Ethan's coat pocket, and the 3 months she had spent learning how to survive this particular fight. And she thought about what she had told Ethan, standing in the yard with a supply bag in her hands. She was not going to run this time. She kept the rifle in her hands and went to check the back door. It was open, not broken open, opened. The latch was undone in the specific way of something that had been worked from outside by someone who knew what they were doing. Clara raised the rifle. She heard a boot on the kitchen floor. "You can put that down, Miss Whitmore," said a voice she did not recognize. A man stepped into the light from the doorway, not one of the riders from the trail. Someone new. Someone who had the particular competence of a professional, not a local hired hand, but someone Caldwell had brought in from outside. "Mr. Caldwell wants to talk to you," he said. "Tonight. He says to tell you it's in your interest to come peaceable." Clara looked at him over the barrel of the rifle. She was calm. She was clear. Her hands were not shaking. "Tell Mr. in Caldwell," she said, "that, if he wants to talk to me, he can do it in public. In front of this town. With every rancher in this valley standing there what he has to say." She did not lower the rifle. "Tell him I'm not interested in private conversations. Tell him I'm done with private conversations." The man looked at her. Then he looked at the rifle. Then he looked at her face, and something in what he saw there appeared to recalibrate his assessment of the situation. "Mr. Caldwell's not going to like that," he said. "I know," Clara said. "That's the point." He stood there for a moment longer. Then he stepped back. Then he went out the back door, and she heard him moving away from the house, and then nothing. Clara stood in the kitchen for a count of 10, breathing steadily, rifle still raised. Then she went to every door and secured it. Then she sat down at the kitchen table with the rifle across her knees and waited for Ethan to come home. The The night was long, the mountain was dark, and somewhere to the north, a man with a scar on his face was riding toward a conversation that was about to change the shape of everything. Clara did not know yet what he would find when he got to Patterson's place. She did not know what Patterson would say, or what the Delaney brothers would say, or whether 2 years of fear and isolation had made them smaller, or had simply made them more careful. What she knew was that Thomas Caldwell had sent a man into Ethan's house tonight, and the man had come face to face with Clara Whitmore, and he had left without what he came for. That was not nothing. That was in fact the beginning of something. She kept the rifle on her knees and watched the door and breathed steadily in the summer dark, and she did not let herself think about all the ways this could still go wrong. She thought instead about what Ethan had said. I have a reason to do something about it beyond my own stubbornness. She held that sentence in the dark, like something that had weight. Ethan came back at midnight. Clara heard his horse before she heard him, the specific rhythm of granite on the North Trail, faster by than the pace he had left with, and that difference in pace told her something before the door opened. She was already standing when he came through it, rifle still in her hands, the lamp turned low on the table. He stopped when he saw her face. What happened? He said. Nay, she told him. All of it, the shadow at the tree line, at the back door, the man in the kitchen, the conversation that had lasted less than 2 minutes and had felt like considerably longer. No. She told it straight and in order without editorializing, the way she had learned to report things when the facts were already dramatic enough without embellishment. Ethan listened without interrupting. No. When she finished, he stood there for a moment with his hat in his hand, and his jaw set in the particular way she had come to recognize as his version of controlled anger, not explosive, not performative. Just a hardening of something that was usually held looser. East a man into my house, Ethan said. Yes, while I was gone. Yes. He set his hat on the hook by the door. He looked at the back door, which she had relatched with a length of rope added to the existing latch. He looked at the rifle in her hands. He looked at her. You're all right, he said. I'm all right, she said. Something in him settled, not relaxed, exactly, but settled the way a man settles when he has confirmed something he needed to confirm. He pulled out a chair and sat down at the table. Patterson will come, he said. He didn't hesitate. He's been waiting for someone to make a move first. His father's land is still in dispute, and he's had lawyers tell him for 2 years that without corroborating testimony, the dispute goes nowhere. He looked at the table. He's got 3 men he trusts who saw Caldwell's crew on that land before the accident. Men who never talked, because nobody with authority ever asked them to. Clara sat down across from him, and the Delaney brothers. Both of them. They lost a water contract 2 years ago that they believe Caldwell engineered. They can't prove of it, but their account of the timeline matches what I saw, and what I saw matches what your documents show. He looked at her directly. We have voices now, Clara. Real ones. People whose names mean something in this county because they've been here 20 years and everybody knows them. Clara exhaled slowly. How long before they can come? 2 days, Ethan said. Maybe 3. Patterson's got to arrange for someone to watch his place while he's gone. He's not leaving it unattended after what happened to his father. We don't have 3 days, Clara said. Caldwell sent that man tonight because he's already moving. When the man reports back that I didn't come, that I held the house, that I refused Caldwell, we'll know the approach isn't working. He'll change strategy. What's the next strategy? Legal pressure, Clara said. He'll find a way to come at us with something that looks official. A warrant, a claim, an injunction, something that gives the sheriff a reason to come out here with authority. She met his eyes. Men. Something that gets me off this property before the ranchers arrive and before the federal letter reaches Washington. Ethan was quiet for a moment. How long does the federal letter take? 10 days to 2 weeks, Clara said, if the routing holds. So we need to survive 10 days. At minimum, he looked at the table. He was thinking she could see it happening, the slow, careful work of a man who did not move fast by instinct, but moved correctly. Then he said, the county commissioner's hearing. There's a regular session the first Thursday of every month. It's public record. Anyone in the county can bring a petition. The next session in 4 days, Ethan said. She held that. If we petition the commissioner directly, in open session, with Patterson and the Delaney's and the testimony and the documents. Caldwell can't bury it, Ethan said. Not if it's public record. Not if it happens in front of the entire town. He looked at her steadily. He's been working in private for 2 years, because private is how he operates. He buys judges. He pressures people. He sends men through back doors in the middle of the night. He has never had to stand up in public and answer for any of it. Clara thought about the man in the kitchen. She thought about the way Caldwell had smiled at her in the yard and held out his card and said I'd hate for her to find herself in the same situation. He'll try to stop us before we get there, she said. Yes, Ethan said. So we need to give him something else to think about for 4 days. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, in the low lamplight, and they planned. They planned the way two people plan when they have each been carrying a problem alone for too long, and have finally found someone who can hold the other end not easily, not without argument, but honestly, with full knowledge of the obstacles and no patience for pretending. The obstacles were smaller than they were. Clara laid out the documents she would present. Ethan outlined the testimony structure. They talked through every objection. Caldwell's lawyers would raise and prepared answers to each one. They talked about who would speak first and in what order, and how to manage the moment when Caldwell himself would inevitably try to redirect. They talked until the lamp burned low, and the night outside began its slow return to morning. At some point Clara said, "You need to sleep. You've ridden 4 hours tonight." "So have you, in a manner of speaking," Ethan said. "I was sitting in a chair, with a rifle," he said. "Across your knees." He looked at her. That's not rest. She did not argue because he was right. She went to her room. She lay down and stared at the ceiling and thought about the commissioner's session on Thursday, and whether 4 days was enough and whether Caldwell would show his hand before then, or wait. She was asleep in under 10 minutes, which surprised her. She had expected her mind to keep running. Instead, it simply stopped, the way a body stops when it has finally been given permission. Morning brought 2 things. The first was a note, delivered by a boy from town who left it on the porch rail and was gone before Clara came outside. It was brief and written in a clean, formal hand. "Miss Whitmore, I think you should know that certain individuals have been asking questions in town about the nature of your employment at the Blackwood Ranch. Questions of an inappropriate nature. You deserve to know this is happening." A friend read it twice. She folded it and kept it. The second was a rider, not one of Caldwell's men, but a woman. She came from the South Trail on a brown mare, and she was perhaps 60 years old and rode with the efficiency of someone who had been on horseback since before she could properly walk. She pulled up in the yard and looked at Clara with the steady assessment of someone who had decided something before she arrived and was now confirming it. "Whitmore," she said. "I am," Clara said. "I'm Mabel Delaney," the woman said. "James and Robert's mother. My boys told me they were coming here Thursday. I came today." Clara looked at her. "Why?" "Because my boys are good men, but they're going to need someone to tell them what to actually say when they get in front of that commissioner," Mabel said. "And because I've been watching Thomas Caldwell ruin people in this valley for 6 years, and I have considerably more to say about it than my sons do." She looked around the yard. "Also because word got to me last night about what happened in this house, and I wanted to look at the woman who held a rifle on one of Caldwell's professionals and told him to deliver a message." She paused. "You're smaller than I expected." Clara almost smiled. "I get that a lot." "Good," Mabel said. "Small is harder to see coming." She climbed down from her horse with the ease of someone who did not need assistance and did not expect any. "Put the mare somewhere she can water. I'll tell you what I know." "It'll take a while." It took 3 hours. Mabel Delaney sat at the kitchen table and spoke with the precision of a woman who had been waiting for the right listener for a very long time. She knew names Clara had not known. She knew dates that filled in gaps in the documentary record. She knew, specifically, about 2 additional payments to Judge Reeves that Clara had not found in the accounts payments made through a secondary business Caldwell, operated under a different name that Clara had not known to look for. Ethan sat at the end of the table and listened and did not interrupt once. When Mabel finished, she looked at both of them and said, "You have enough. You've had enough since February if someone had known how to put it together." She looked at Clara. "You put it together." "We put it together," Clara said. Mabel looked at Ethan, then back at Clara. Something in the old woman's expression adjusted a small private adjustment that she did not comment on. She said, "I'll have my boys there. I'll have 2 other families there who Caldwell wronged and who have never been asked to say so publicly." She stood. "What I need from you is that those documents are real. Every number on every page is provable. They're real," Clara said. "Then we go Thursday," Mabel said. "And God help Thomas Caldwell when we do." She left the way she came efficiently without ceremony, and the yard was quiet after her. Ethan looked at Clara. Clara looked at the table. "We have enough," she said. "We've had enough since February," Ethan said, with something quiet in his voice. "You just needed someone to stand next to you when you used it." She looked up at him. There was something in his face, something that had been building in the margins of the last 4 days, something she had been recording without naming, and for a moment she did not know what to do with the directness of it. Then she said, "We need to make copies of everything. Tonight. In case something happens to the originals before Thursday." Nodded. He was still looking at her in that way. "Ethan. Copies. Tonight," he stood. "I'll get more paper." They worked all afternoon. Organized the documents into sections: the financial records, the surveyor payments, the judicial bribery evidence, the land acquisition timeline, and wrote a clear index that would allow the commissioner to follow the argument without needing her to explain every step. Ethan made copies in a hand that was slow but legible, and did not complain about the slowness. At one point he said, without looking up from the page, "After this is over." Clara looked up. He did not finish the sentence immediately. He kept writing. "After this is over," he said, "again, I'd like to ask you something." "What?" she said. He looked up. "Not yet." "After." She looked at him for a moment. Something settled in her chest, not the anxious settling of a problem resolved, but something warmer and more disorienting. "All right," she said. They kept working. The trouble came on Wednesday. Clara had known it would come before Thursday. She had told Ethan as much, had built it into the plan, had tried to prepare for it. But knowing trouble is coming and having it arrive are 2 different kinds of experience. And when the sheriff's wagon rolled into the yard at mid-morning with 2 deputies and a document in the sheriff's hand, she felt the specific cold clarity of a person entering the thing they have been bracing for. Sheriff Aldrin was a compact man in his 50s with small, careful eyes and the expression of someone who knew he was doing something uncomfortable and had decided that efficiency was the best way through it. He climbed down from the wagon and looked at Clara, and then at Ethan, who had come from the barn and was standing in the yard with the kind of stillness that was not passivity. "Miss Whitmore," the sheriff said, "I have a warrant here for your detainment pending inquiry into allegations of theft and fraud related to your employment in Billings, Montana, filed by the Caldwell Timber Company." Clara said, "Let me see it." Aldrin extended the document. She took it. She read it. The warrant was real, properly signed, properly formatted, citing the correct legal language. It was also constructed on fabrication so thorough that they had clearly been assembled by someone who knew exactly what documentation to produce to make a lie look like procedure. She looked up. "This warrant names charges filed in Yellowstone County," she said. "That's not this county. Your jurisdiction is Custer County Sheriff. You cannot execute a Yellowstone warrant in Custer County without a countersigning order from the Custer County Commissioner." Aldrin blinked. One of the deputies looked at the other. Aldrin started. "It's the law," Clara said. "Montana Territorial Code, Section 14, Judicial Procedure." I'd suggest you verify that before you do something that would make you personally liable for an unlawful detainment. She handed the warrant back to him. And I'd suggest you consider carefully who gave you this document and why, and whether you want your name attached to the legal aftermath of what's going to happen tomorrow morning at the commissioner's session. The yard was very quiet. Aldrin looked at the warrant. He looked at Clara. He looked at Ethan, who had not moved or spoken, and whose stillness was communicating something specific and effective without requiring words. I'll need to verify the jurisdictional question, Aldrin said finally. I'd expect nothing less, Clara said. The sheriff got back in his wagon and conferred with his deputies in a low voice for approximately 30 seconds. Then he drove out of the yard. Clara stood in the sun until the wagon was out of sight. Then she turned to Ethan. He'll be back, she said. With a countersigned warrant or something else. Tonight at the latest. Tonight we won't be here, Ethan said. She looked at him. Patterson's offered his place for the night, Ethan said. I was going to tell you. His ranch is outside the county seat jurisdiction, technically a different precinct. Any warrant Aldrin gets will need to be refiled for that location, and that takes at least 24 hours. He paused. And we leave this afternoon. Patterson. He wrote, the Delaney's, Mabel. All of us, we go over together tonight, and we arrive at the commissioner's session together tomorrow morning. Clara thought about it. She thought about the documents under the kitchen floor, the copies they had made, the federal letter already on its way east. The originals need to come with us, she said. Obviously. And if Caldwell gets to the commissioner before we arrive. Then we deal with that when it happens, Ethan said. We can't prevent every move he makes. We can only make sure we're there to counter them. She looked at him. You sound like you've done this before, she said. I've run horses into difficult situations before, he said. Ace. Same principle, you can't control the terrain. You can only control your pace and your direction. He almost smiled. This time she let herself. They reached Patterson's ranch before dark, and it was the first time in 4 days that Clara had been in a room with more than 2 people who were entirely on the same side of the problem. Patterson was younger than she expected, mid-30s, quietly furious in the way of someone who had been holding a specific anger for 2 years without anywhere to put it. The Delaney brothers were large, practical men who shook Clara's hand with the kind of firmness that communicated respect rather than performance. Mabel presided over the kitchen with the authority of a woman who has spent decades being the most competent person in any given room and has stopped being modest about it. They sat together that evening, and Clara laid out the full plan, the order of presentation, the documents, the testimony sequence, the legal argument. She walked them through every point Caldwell's lawyers would try to challenge and how to respond. She was precise and she was thorough. And when she finished, the room was quiet in the way that rooms get quiet when people have just understood the full shape of what they are about to do. Patterson said, You've been carrying this for 6 months. Clara said, Alone. Until recently, Aiden, she said, and she did not look at Ethan when she said it, but she felt him across the table. We should have done this 2 years ago, Patterson said. You didn't have the documents 2 years ago, Clara said. And you didn't have a federal letter in transit. You have both now. She looked around the table. Tomorrow we use them. She slept 4 hours on a cot in Patterson's spare room and woke before anyone else. She sat with the documents in her lap in the early dark and read through them one more time, not because she did not know them, but because she needed to feel the weight of them. The specific paper and ink weight of something true that had been suppressed for too long. She was ready. She had been ready for 6 months. She was simply now finally in a position to be ready in the right direction. Morning came. They rode into Black Pine together, Clara and Ethan, Patterson, the Delaney brothers, Mabel, and the 2 additional families that Mabel had spoken of, who arrived at the crossroads as arranged and fell in without ceremony. 8 people on horseback and 1 wagon, moving through the summer morning toward the county building at the center of town. They drew eyes from the moment they entered the main road. In. Clara felt the attention of the town like a physical presence, people stopping, people looking, people stepping out to watch a group of ranchers arrive with the kind of collective purpose that a small town recognizes as significant. Thomas Caldwell was already there. Of course he was. He stood on the steps of the county building, with 2 lawyers and 3 other men. And he watched them come with the expression of a man who has been told to expect something and has prepared himself, and is now making the adjustment between what he prepared for and what has actually arrived. Had arrived was larger than he expected. Clara could see it in the microsecond recalculation that happened in his face. He recovered quickly. He was very good at recovering quickly. "Miss Whitmore," he said, when they were close enough. At the group behind her, and friends. His gaze moved to Ethan and held there for a moment. "Blackwood, I didn't expect you'd go to these lengths." "I didn't do this," Ethan said. "She did." Caldwell looked at Clara. Clara looked back at him. She was carrying the documents in a leather folder under her arm, and she held his gaze with exactly the steadiness of someone who has spent 3 months being afraid, and has decided, on this specific morning, to be done with that. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, "I suggest you speak to your lawyers before the session opens. What's about to happen in that room is going to go better for everyone if you're prepared for it." "A threat," he said. "It's a courtesy," she said. "The last one I plan to extend." She walked past him and up the steps and through the door. Behind her, she heard the footsteps of 8 people following. And she heard something else, something she had not anticipated, something that changed the texture of the morning before she even reached the commissioner's chamber. Men. From the main road, from the storefronts in the boarding house and the post and the feed store, people were coming. Not ranchers, not people with a stake in the case. Ordinary people, shopkeepers and their wives, and men who worked the surrounding farms, and women who had watched from windows for 2 years, while Caldwell made himself the unavoidable fact of their county. They were coming to watch, and watching, Clara understood, was its own kind of testimony. The commissioner's chamber filled faster than it had filled in years. Clara stood at the petitioner's table and organized her documents with hands that were entirely steady, and a heartbeat that she was managing through sheer will. Beside her, Ethan stood with his hat in his hands and his shoulders level. Behind her, Patterson and the Delaneys and Mabel occupied the first row of benches. Caldwell sat across the room with his lawyers, and for the first time in 2 years of watching him operate, he looked like a man who was doing arithmetic and not liking the total. Commissioner Hale was a gray-haired man with reading glasses and the expression of someone who had sat in this chair for 20 years and had seen enough to be difficult to surprise. He looked at the packed chamber. He looked at the petitioner's table. He looked at Caldwell's table. He said, "We'll come to order." The room went quiet. Clara looked down at her documents. She thought about her mother in the doorway with her hands pressed together. She thought about Black Pine on the day she arrived, the whispers and the closed doors and the laughter in the dark alley. She thought about 6 months of carrying something true through a world that kept trying to make her put it down. And "Commissioner Hale," she said, her voice clear and level and carrying to every corner of the room. "My name is Clara Whitmore, and I am here to present documented evidence of judicial bribery, fraudulent land acquisition, witness intimidation, and criminal conspiracy perpetrated by Thomas Caldwell against the ranchers and landowners of this county over a period of not less than 4 years." The room was absolutely silent. Thomas Caldwell went very still. Clara opened the folder. "I'd like to begin," she said, "with the payments to Judge Reeves." Silence in that chamber lasted exactly 3 seconds. It broke all at once, the shuffle of people leaning forward, the creak of benches, the low urgent sound of a room recalibrating itself around a new reality. Commissioner Hale removed his reading glasses and put them back on. Caldwell's lead lawyer was already on his feet. "Commissioner, I must object to the framing of this presentation. This woman has no standing before this body. She is not a resident of this county." She has outstanding fraud allegations against her in Yellowstone County, and any documents she produces should be regarded as potentially falsified. Down, Mr. Harlow, Commissioner Hale said. Harlow sat. Not because he wanted to, because the commissioner's voice had a specific quality that communicated that the next person who spoke out of turn would find the session considerably less hospitable. Hale looked at Clara. You have the floor, Miss Whitmore. Make your presentation. Clara opened the folder. She had organized it in the night at Patterson's ranch, sitting by lamplight while everyone else slept, putting the documents in an order that told a story rather than simply presenting evidence. She understood, in the way that someone understands after months of preparation, that facts alone are never enough. Facts need a shape. They need a sequence that a person can follow and feel the weight of before they are asked to act on it. She started with the money. Part of 1,881. Aiden, she said. The Caldwell Timber Company made bid of $400 to a surveyor named Elias Booth for services rendered in Custer County. I have the invoice. She laid it on the commissioner's table. I also have a sworn deposition from Booth himself, obtained before I left Billings, in which he states that he rendered no services to the Caldwell Company in that period. He was in fact working a contract in Gallatin County for the entirety of that month. She laid the invoice. The $400 was not payment for surveying. It was payment for a survey report that placed the boundary lines of the Patterson land parcel 200 yards east of their actual position, a report that was submitted to this court in the original land dispute hearing and accepted as evidence. The room was very still. Patterson, in the first row, made a sound that was not quite a word. Commissioner Hale looked at the invoice. He looked at the deposition. Looked at Clara, he said. She continued. She moved through the documents the way she had planned, not rushing, not pausing longer than necessary, keeping the thread tight and the logic visible. The surveyor payments, the judicial payments to Judge Reeves, laid out in a sequence that showed not one transaction but 7, as spread across 18 months, each one recorded under a supply account for the Caldwell Operations Secondary Company. The land acquisition timeline, 3 separate parcels, each one purchased under duress, each one preceded by the specific pattern of pressure that Caldwell had refined into a system. 5 minutes into her presentation, Caldwell's lawyer interrupted again. This time Hale let him speak, because the objection was technical and deserved an answer, and Clara gave it calmly, aiding, directly, notes the specific account records that made the objection irrelevant. Harlow sat back down. Mabel Delaney said from the first row, just that one sound, but it carried. Noldwell, across the room, was very still. He had the expression of a man watching something he had thought was contained, demonstrating that it was not. His stillness was not calm. It was the stillness of someone managing a very large response very hard, keeping it internal because external was not an option yet. Clara came to Judge Reeves. The payments to Judge Reeves totaled $2,300 over 18 months, she said. I have copies of 7 transactions. I have a record of the case numbers that came before Judge Reeves's court in the same period. And I have noted which of those cases involved parties with business relationships with the Caldwell Timber Company. She looked at Commissioner Hale directly. Every case in which Caldwell had an interest, and that came before Judge Reeves in that period, was decided in Caldwell's favor. Everyone, including the testimony of Ethan Blackwood, which was dismissed on procedural grounds that I can demonstrate were manufactured. Ethan did not move beside her. She felt him not moving the way you feel a wall, holding solid and deliberate. One of Caldwell's lawyers said something to the other in a very low voice. Clara laid the final page of the judicial section on the commissioner's table and straightened. Commissioner Hale, she said, I want to be clear about something. I am not asking this court to take my word for any of this. Every claim I have made is documented. Every document is verifiable through independent sources. I have not told you anything this morning that cannot be confirmed by examining records that exist independent of my own copies. She paused. What I am asking is that you call for a formal federal review of the land decisions made in this county in the past 4 years, that you immediately suspend the outstanding Yellowstone warrant against me pending verification of its origins, and that you place the business operations of the Caldwell Timber Company in this county under administrative hold until that review is complete. Room exhaled not in relief, but in the collective understanding of what she had just asked for and what it meant. A. Caldwell moved. He had been still for 22 minutes, and now he moved, and the movement drew every eye in the room because it was controlled and deliberate, and preceded by a decision that Clara could see him making behind his eyes. He stood. "Commissioner," he said. His voice was smooth and practiced and carried the weight of a man who had been the most powerful person in most rooms for a very long time. "I want to address the chamber directly, if I may." Hale looked at him. "You'll have the opportunity to respond formally. This is the petitioner's presentation." "With respect," Caldwell said, "I think this chamber deserves to understand who it is they're listening to." He looked at Clara, and his eyes were very calm, which was the most frightening thing about him. Miss Whitmore was dismissed from her position in Billings for cause. The records of her dismissal were created by your company 4 days after I began keeping records of your payments, Clara said. Are a matter of public record. No, Caldwell continued, barely pausing, and I would invite the commissioner to obtain them. He spread his hands in the gesture of a man being entirely reasonable. I understand that circumstances drive people to desperate actions. I have no personal animosity toward Miss Whitmore. But what is being presented here as documented evidence is in fact a collection of selectively copied records designed to support a narrative that Mr. Patterson, Clara said. Patterson stood. Caldwell stopped. My name is Ransom Patterson, Patterson said, and his voice was the voice of a man who had been holding a specific sentence for 2 years and had finally been given permission to say it. My father, William Patterson, owned the North Valley parcel that Caldwell Timber has been operating on for the past 18 months. My father did not sell that land. He was found at the bottom of a ravine in October of 1881, 3 weeks after he refused Caldwell's fourth offer. He looked at Caldwell directly. I have 3 witnesses who will testify that Caldwell's men were seen on our property the morning before my father's accident. I have never been asked to bring this before any official body in this county. I am bringing it now. The room came apart slightly, not in chaos, but in the way a room comes apart when something true lands in it that changes the acoustics of everything else. Harlow was on his feet again. Commissioner, this is completely improper procedure. This man has no filed petition. Sit down, Mr. Harlow, said Commissioner Hale, for the second time. And Harlow sat down for the second time, with the expression of a man beginning to understand that today was not going to go the way he had planned. Robert Delaney stood next, then James. Each of them said what they had come to say: the water contract, the timeline, the specific incidents that matched the pattern in Clara's documents. They were not eloquent. They were better than eloquent. They were specific and steady and clearly furious in the quiet way of men who have held something a long time. Mabel did not stand. She had already spoken 2 years ago to every person in this county who would listen, and nobody had done anything about it. She sat in the front row with her hands folded and looked at Thomas Caldwell with the expression of a woman who has outlasted everyone who ever underestimated her, and is prepared to outlast this too. Caldwell looked at the room. He looked at the commissioner. He looked at Clara, and Clara saw at the precise moment when he recalculated and found that the numbers had changed. It was not surrender. Men like Caldwell did not have a surrender in them. It was the moment of choosing the next position where to retreat to, what to protect, what to sacrifice to save the rest. He sat down. He leaned to his lawyer and said something very brief in his ear. Harlow nodded. Clara watched this exchange. Felt a cold clarity in her chest because she knew what it meant. Caldwell was not finished. He was regrouping, and regrouping men with money and lawyers and 2 years of established power did not simply accept a bad morning and go home. Commissioner Hale called a 30-minute recess. The chamber emptied into the hallway in a low roar of voices, and Clara stood at the petitioner's table for a moment before she moved, organizing the documents back into the folder with hands that were steady now, with the specific steadiness of someone who has been running towards something for a very long time and has finally arrived at the thing itself. Ethan appeared beside her. "You did it. We're not done," she said. "No," he said, "but you did it." She looked at him. He was looking at her the way he had looked at her across the kitchen table 4 days ago, when he said, "After this is over," and she had the same response now that she'd had then the disorienting warmth of it. It landed differently than it had any practical right to. "Harlow is going to file a counter motion in the recess," she said. "He'll try to get the session suspended on procedural grounds so Caldwell has time to mine." Clara, Ethan said. She stopped for 30 minutes, he said. "Can you let it be what it is?" Nair. She looked at him. She thought about what it was, the packed chamber, a commissioner, with her documents in front of him, Patterson's voice saying, "I am bringing it now." Mabel sitting in the front row like a woman who has outlasted every storm this valley has ever produced. She thought about 3 months on the road, and 6 months before that carrying documents through a job that was being dismantled around her, and a reputation that was being systematically destroyed. She thought about a dark alley behind a general store, and a deep voice saying she belongs to herself. 30 minutes, she said. He nodded. He handed her a cup of water that she had not seen him get. She took it and drank and stood in the hallway while the room talked around them, and she allowed herself, for exactly 30 minutes, to believe that things were going to be all right. The recess ended. Harlow had not filed the counter motion, which meant either he had advised against it or Caldwell had decided differently. Clara did not know which, and she was still deciding what that meant when Commissioner Hale returned to his chair and called the room to order. Caldwell stood. "Commissioner," he said, "I have a statement." Hale looked at him. "This is irregular, I understand," Caldwell said. "I'm going to ask for 30 seconds of this chamber's indulgence." He looked at Clara. Not with the smooth calculation of earlier. With something that was harder to categorize, something that was not quite concession but was adjacent to it, in the way that a man stands when he has decided what the least damaging version of this looks like and has committed to it. The documents presented by Miss Whitmore are largely accurate in their figures. A sound in the room, quickly suppressed. There have been financial arrangements in this county that I now recognize were improperly structured. Anne. I am prepared to work with the Commissioner's office to review the relevant land decisions and to establish a process for appropriate restitution to affected landowners. The room went very quiet. Clara stared at him. She had expected more fight. She had prepared for more fight. No. She had stayed up until 2 in the morning preparing for more fight, and here was Thomas Caldwell, in front of a packed chamber, and a commissioner, who now had her documents in front of him. Making the calculation that controlled surrender was better than total exposure. He was still protecting something. She could feel it. Additionally, Caldwell said, and here his voice changed. Something tightened in it, controlled but visible. I am withdrawing the Yellowstone County warrant against Miss Whitmore. The allegations that formed the basis of that warrant were, he paused. Overstated. Clara heard that word and felt it sit in her chest like something with edges. Patterson made a sound behind her. Mabel, from the front row, overstated in a tone that communicated exactly what she thought of that word, and several people around her made sounds of agreement. Clara looked at Commissioner Hale. Hale looked at Caldwell. He looked at Clara. He looked at the documents on the table in front of him. He looked at the room full of people who had come to watch what happened when someone finally said the true thing out loud in public. "Mr. Caldwell," Hale said, "your willingness to cooperate with a review is noted. However, what has been presented this morning constitutes evidence of potential criminal conduct, not administrative irregularity. And the disposition of this matter is no longer within my purview to manage through a private review process." He took his glasses off. I am referring this matter to the Federal Land Commissioner's Office for full investigation, and I am issuing a formal request to the Territorial Attorney for review of the judicial conduct allegations concerning Judge Reeves. He paused. I am also, effective immediately, placing a hold on all Caldwell Timber Company operations in this county, pending the outcome of those reviews. The room erupted, not in chaos and the specific sound of a community that has been holding its breath for 2 years and has just been given permission to breathe. Clara stood at the petitioner's table and heard it happen around her, the voices, the movement, the particular quality of a room that is processing a shift in its own understanding of itself. Aldwell sat down. His face was composed. It was always composed. Something behind it was different now. And the difference was this. He had walked into this room as the most powerful person in it, and he was leaving as something else. Harlow leaned close and said something. Caldwell listened without responding. Ethan put his hand on Clara's shoulder just briefly, just the weight of it for a moment, and then took it away. She turned and looked at Patterson, who was standing with his eyes bright and his jaw tight, the expression of a man who is not going to cry in public, but is working harder than usual to maintain that commitment. She looked at the Delaney brothers, who were shaking hands with each other with the relieved formality of men who had not allowed themselves to hope for very long and were now recalibrating. She looked at Mabel, who was looking directly at Clara, with an expression that communicated, without a single word, something like, I knew it was you. Knew when I walked into that yard and saw you standing there. Commissioner Hale was speaking again, something procedural about the timeline for the federal referral, and Clara heard it, but was not precisely listening, because there was something still unresolved, something she could feel the edges of. The thing that Caldwell had been protecting when he made his controlled surrender. She looked at him across the room. He was watching her. Not with the calculation of earlier, with the specific attention of someone who has lost a battle and is already mapping the war. She did not look away. He looked away first. That, she told herself, would have to be enough for today. The chamber session closed. The room began to clear slowly in the way of people who do not want to stop being in the same space as something that has just happened. There were handshakes and voices, and at some point the Delaney brothers were embracing their mother in the hallway with the unself-conscious emotion of men who have been carrying something too heavy for too long. Stood in the doorway of the chamber with the leather folder her arm and watched it all happen and felt something she did not have an immediate word for, something that was not triumph. Exactly, and was not relief. And was not the simple satisfaction of a task completed. It was something more complex and more quiet than any of those things. It was the specific feeling of a person who has spent so long fighting to be believed that the moment of being believed does not land as joy, not right away, but as a kind of stunned stillness. The feeling of having braced for a wall for so long that when the wall comes down you stand in the gap and have to remember how to walk through open space. Ethan came and stood beside her. The commissioner wants your original documents held with the court, he said. The federal referral. I know, she said. That's fine. I have copies. In the kitchen floor. In the kitchen floor, she confirmed. He looked at her sideways with something that was almost humor and was also something else entirely. I'd like to move those to somewhere better. The tin box? She said. He looked forward again. Different box. She was quiet for a moment. Ethan, I said after. We're not there yet. She almost smiled. This time she let herself, though it was small and she kept it to herself. They rode back to the ranch that afternoon, not the careful urgent ride of the past 4 days, but something slower. Patterson rode with them as far as the North Trail cutoff and said, before he turned off, my father would have wanted to meet you, Miss Whitmore. He did not wait for a response. He tipped his hat and rode. Clara watched him go. She thought about William Patterson at the bottom of a ravine. She thought about the people Caldwell had damaged and the ones he had destroyed, and the specific calculus of a man who had decided that other people's lives were acceptable costs for his ambitions. She thought about Caldwell watching her across the chamber with that mapping the war expression. He's not finished, she said. No, Ethan said. The federal review will take months. Maybe longer. During that time, he'll have lawyers working every angle. Yes, Ethan said. And Judge Reeves will retain his position until the territorial attorney acts, which could be... Nor she stopped. I know all of that, he said. We'll deal with all of that. But right now it's late afternoon, and we've been awake for 36 hours, and Ghost hasn't been properly worked in 3 days, and the east fence still has 3 sections that need reposting before autumn. Looked at him. The work doesn't stop, he said. Even when other things are happening. The horses still need working. The fence still needs mending. The accounts still need managing. He paused. And I would very much like to cook supper tonight, without it also being a strategy session. Looked at him for a long time. Ghost, she said finally. Did you rename him? Something moved in Ethan's face. Said a name tells a thing what it could be. What did you name him? Ethan was quiet for a moment. River, he said. He's always moving, even when he looks still. I thought it fit. Clara looked at the trail ahead. She thought about a horse who had spent 8 months convinced everything was going to hurt him, learning very slowly that not everything did. She thought about what it looked like to change from the inside, not dramatically, not all at once, but incrementally, each small accommodation adding up to something that was eventually recognizable as trust. It fits, she said. They reached the ranch as the sun moved toward the western ridge. The horses in the barn made their evening sounds, the particular comfortable noise of animals who expected to be fed and were not particularly worried about it. The creek in the west pasture was audible through the summer air. Main house stood the way it had stood when she arrived, solid and functional, built to last rather than impress. But it was not what it had been when she arrived. She understood that as she climbed down from the wagon and looked at it, something in the quality of it had shifted. Not its structure, its character, the difference between a building and a place. Ethan unhitched the horse and led him toward the barn. At the barn door he stopped. I said I wanted to ask you something, he said. After. Clara looked at him across the yard. It's after, she said. He turned to face her. He had his hat in his hands, the way he always did when he was about to say something that mattered. And he looked at her with the directness that she had come to understand was not aggression and was not performance. It was simply the way this particular man delivered truth, straight and without softening, because he did not know how to say important things any other way. I'd like you to stay, he said. The yard was very quiet. Not because the accounts need managing, he said. Not because the contract horses need working or the supply records need straightening. Those things are all true and they matter, but they are not why I'm asking. He paused. I've been alone on this ranch for 2 years. I told myself it was a choice. I told myself I preferred it. He stopped, and she could see him choosing the word carefully wrong. About that, he looked at her steadily. I want you to stay, Clara. I want you to be here. I don't know how to say that in a smaller way than that, so I won't try. She stood in the yard and looked at him. She thought about her mother in the doorway with her hands pressed together, and the 11-year-old girl who had memorized the shape of that moment. She thought about the decision she had made then, that she would never beg, never press her hands together for something that should have been freely given. She thought about how that decision had protected her, and also in certain ways had kept her standing outside of things. She thought about a dark alley and a voice that said she belongs to herself, and how that sentence had been the first time in a very long time that anyone had given her herself back without wanting something in return. I want to be here, she said. Something in Ethan's face changed, not dramatically, not into the broad expression of a man who has just gotten what he wanted. Something quieter and more thorough, the look of a person who has braced for a particular answer for long enough that a different answer takes a moment to settle. All right, he said. But I want wages, she said. Real ones, not absorbed into some other arrangement. Real wages for real work, he almost smiled. Not quite. We already agreed on that. I want it to remain true regardless of whatever else this is. It will remain true, he said. He nodded. They stood in the yard for a moment more, with the weight of what had just been said still settling around them, and then Ethan turned and led the horse into the barn, and Clara went into the house. Nettie. She stood in the kitchen. She looked at the work table, the reorganized shelves, the spot near the window where she had taken to keeping her letters and her notes, and the small pile of things that had gradually accumulated into the shape of someone who lived here. She looked at the floor, near the left side of the table, third plank from the wall, where the documents she'd carried for 6 months were resting beneath the boards. She made coffee. Ethan came in from the barn and washed his hands at the basin, and sat down at the table without ceremony, the way a person sits at a table that is also their table. Clara poured 2 cups and sat across from him, and they drank coffee in the kitchen of the Blackwood Ranch as the summer evening came down over the Montana mountain, and the horses settled in the barn, and the creek ran somewhere below the west pasture, and none of it required any commentary. The Federal Review arrived 6 weeks later. 2 federal investigators, sent from the Land Commissioner's office in Washington, who arrived in Black Pine with credentials that the sheriff could not dismiss and questions that Caldwell's lawyers were unable to redirect. Clara met with them for 3 days. She provided the documents. She answered every question precisely and without editorializing, and directed them, for each claim, the independent verification sources she had cataloged months ago in a Billings boarding house while she was still deciding whether to run or fight. Judge Reeves was suspended from the bench pending investigation within the first week of the Federal Review. He resigned before the second week ended, which answered a question about whether he planned to contest the charges. And Caldwell retained his lawyers and made statements through them, and did not appear personally in Black Pine for 3 months. The administrative hold on his temporation remained in place. Patterson's land dispute was reopened under federal jurisdiction, with a new survey ordered, a legitimate one, conducted by a surveyor from outside the county. The Yellowstone warrant was formally withdrawn and expunged from the public record on a Tuesday morning in September. Clara received the notice by post. She read it at the kitchen table. She set it down. She picked up the account ledger she had been working in and found the page where, 4 days after she arrived, she had pressed the federal letter between the pages like something growing in the dark. She looked at the letter. Then she looked at the room around her. She put the ledger away and went outside. Where Ethan was working River in the east paddock, the gray horse who was no longer gray with suspicion, but moved now with the specific ease of an animal that has decided the world does not intend to hurt him. She stood at the fence and watched. River saw her and turned his head, which he had not done 2 months ago, because 2 months ago a person at the fence was a reason to move away. Ethan saw her. "Well, it's done," she said. He looked her for a moment. River stood beside him with his head relaxed, not pulling away. "In," Ethan said, not to the horse, to Clara. She opened the fence gate and walked in, and River turned to look at her, with his large dark eyes not defensively, just with the uncomplicated attention of an animal deciding what it thinks. She put her hand out. He moved his nose toward her palm. There, Ethan said quietly. "Yes," she said. She stood in the paddock with the horse's breath warm on her hand, and the September mountain air coming down cool from the ridge, and Ethan standing 3 feet away in the easy silence that had long since stopped feeling like distance. She thought about Black Pine on the day she arrived, the whispers and the closed doors, the women who watched from windows, the men who laughed in the dark. She thought about what the town would do now, in the aftermath of what had happened in the commissioner's chamber, now that the shape of things had changed. Some of them had already changed. Pryor, at the Mercantile, had greeted her by name last week, without the careful caution of a man watching to see which direction the wind was blowing. Harris at the Post asked after Ethan without the studied neutrality of someone avoiding association. Ings, the small things were always first. Mrs. Aldrich at the boarding house had not greeted her at all. That too was information, and Clara accepted it without investment, because she had stopped needing the approval of people who only extended it when approval cost them nothing. Mabel Delaney came out to the ranch twice in September. The second time she stayed for supper and sat at the kitchen table with her coffee after and looked at Clara and Ethan and said, "You two going to do something formal about this arrangement at some point, or just keep pretending you're only business partners?" Ethan looked at the table. Clara said, "We're working on it." Mabel said, with the specific intonation of a woman who has raised two sons and has excellent calibration for the difference between working on it and avoiding it, and did not press further. Because Mabel also knew that some things required their own time. November came. The Bozeman contract horses were delivered on time, 12 horses, trained with Ethan and Clara and one reliable hand that Clara's contact in Billings had sent in September. The depot official who received them said they were some of the best prepared animals he had seen out of a private ranch in 3 years. Ethan said thank you in his particular brief way and did not make more of it. Clara wrote it in the accounts. The east fence was reposted. The Hargrove debt was settled. The supply ledger was current for the first time, apparently, since the previous spring. One evening in late November, when the first cold was coming off the mountain and the days were shortening toward winter, Ethan came in from checking the north pasture and sat down at the kitchen table and reached into his coat pocket and set something on the table between them. It was a ring, plain silver, not elaborate, the kind of ring that was made to be worn while working. Clara looked at it. She looked at him. He said, "I've been trying to decide how to ask this properly for about 3 months. I've concluded I don't know how to do it properly, so I'm going to do it honestly instead." He looked at her steadily. "At what you've been through, I know what it cost you to trust this place and this arrangement. I know you've made yourself a life here that belongs to you, your wages, your work, your standing. I'm not asking you to give any of that up." He paused. "Asking you to let this also be yours, all of it. The horses and the accounts and the bad fence line and the view off the north ridge on a clear morning." He looked at the ring. "And at her, and me if you want." Clara looked at the ring on the table between them. She thought about everything she had walked away from and everything she had walked toward and the specific uncrossable distance between what she had believed she deserved and what she had, somewhere in the course of 4 months on a mountain ranch in Montana, begun to allow herself to want. She thought about her mother in the doorway, and the girl who had memorized that shape, and the woman that girl had become, who had carried a truth across 3 months and 400 miles, and stood in a packed courthouse chamber, and said it out loud when every previous version of events had. He told her that saying it would cost her everything. She reached across the table and picked up the ring. She looked at it in her hand. "I want," she said. Ethan's breath released in the specific way of a man who has been holding something carefully for a very long time and has finally been told he can put it down. She put the ring on. It fit, which surprised her. She looked up at him. "How did you know the size?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Mabel," he said. Clara stared at him. "She measured your other rings when you left them on the windowsill one morning," he said. "In August," Clara said. "You asked Mabel in August." "I wanted to be ready," he said, "in case." She looked at the ring on her hand. She looked at this man, this difficult, quiet, steadfast man who had walked into an alley for a woman he did not know and had asked Mabel Delaney to measure rings in August because he wanted to be ready in case, who had spent 2 years alone on a mountain, believing it was a choice and had changed his mind without drama or announcement, who named a frightened gray horse River, and worked him every day until the horse believed the world would not hurt him. "Most careful man I have ever met," she said. "Yes," he said. He did not apologize for it. "I mean it as a compliment," she said. "I know," he said. She stood up from the table and went to the window and looked out at the mountain in the late November evening, the same mountain that had been there every morning she woke up in this house. The same view that had slowly become the view she expected, the view that her eyes went to first when they opened in the morning. Behind her, she heard Ethan stand. She heard his boots on the floor. She felt him stop close behind her, meet, not touching, just present, in the way she had come to know as his specific way of saying "I'm here" without requiring the words. "I used to think I was passing through," she said. "The first few weeks, I know," he said. "I could tell." "When did you stop thinking so?" He was quiet for a moment. "When you named River," he said. "You said you'd need to spend more time with him before you knew. And then you did. Every morning, even when there were other things to do." He paused. "Yeah, that's not what someone does when they're passing through." She turned around and looked at him. Outside, the mountain held its particular evening stillness, that deep Montana quiet that had once seemed foreign and had become, across 4 months, as familiar as breathing. The horses were in the barn. The accounts were current. Documents were in federal hands. The ring was on her finger. Yeah, and Ethan Blackwood was looking at her the way he had looked at her since the beginning, not with a man deciding what something was worth, but with the patient, unperforming attention of someone who had already decided. She had come to this ranch with nothing but a leather folder full of truth, and the stubbornness to use it. She had not planned for this. She had not allowed herself to plan for this, the specific warmth of a kitchen that was also her kitchen, the horses who came to the fence when they saw her. The man who asked Mabel Delaney to measure rings in August because he wanted to be ready in case. You cannot plan for the things that save you. You can only be honest enough, brave enough, stubborn enough to still be standing when they arrive. Clara had been all three. She reached up and put her hand against the scarred side of his face, and he went very still under her palm the way River had gone still when she first held her hand, out stillness of something that has been waiting to trust and has finally decided to. "This is mine," she said quietly, "not a question. A recognition." "Yes," Ethan said. "It is." And in the Montana mountain evening, the federal referral in Washington, and the east fence reposted, and the horses settled in the barn, and the accounts finally, genuinely balanced. Clara Whitmore understood something she had walked 400 miles and through one courthouse and through every door that had been closed in her face to learn. That belonging was not something that was given to you by people who decided you were worthy of it. It was something you built, with true things and honest work, and the willingness to stand in a pack, say what you knew to be real, even when every version of events said it would cost you everything. She had paid the cost. What she had received in return was not charity, and it was not rescue, and it was not the relieved exhale of someone who had been saved from something. It was a home, earned, kept hers, and that was everything.